Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us. We had a little bit of some technical difficulties, but we appreciate that you're here with us. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Dr. Hilda Billups, and I currently serve as the chair of webinars for TACUSPA. We're pleased to change up the format of today's webinar just a little bit. Our panelist for today serves as TACUSPA's Vice President of Administration, Dr. Tondra Moore. She has a wealth of knowledge about student affairs practice, and we're happy that she's going to share with us today. Allow me to introduce our interviewer for today's webinar. Dr. Anthony Edwards serves as TACUSPA's Director of Research and is a member of the Webinars Committee. Anthony serves as an assistant professor in the Department of Educational Leadership and Technology at Tarleton State University. Anthony's teaching assignments include higher education leadership, higher education student services, higher education finance, higher education policy and politics, higher education history, and the Comprehensive Community College. Dr. Edwards previously served as the director of Tarleton Online at Tarleton State University, a professor of biology at Panola College, senior vice president of talent at the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce, and science department chair at Granby High School. Dr. Edwards also served as a secondary science teacher in Fort Worth ISD and Huckabee ISD. Anthony's research agenda focuses on organizational change in higher education with respect to strategic planning, STEM education, higher education marketing, academic advising, and educational technology. Anthony has published manuscripts in the Journal of Higher Education Management and the HAPS Educator. In addition to chairing dissertation committees, Dr. Edwards supports student success as a coordinator of the Higher Education Leadership Concentration in the Master of Education program in Educational Administration. We are very excited to have Dr. Edwards serve as our interviewer today with us, and we're thankful to our panelists for her willingness to share. I will now turn this over to Dr. Edwards.
Thank you so much, Dr. Billups. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for TACUSPA's mentoring webinar. And our learning objectives for this webinar are to increase the knowledge of success strategies for student affairs, student services professionals, and to understand what skills student leaders need to succeed. So allow me to introduce our panelists for today's webinar. Dr. Moore serves the TACUSPA board as Vice President of Administration. And she also serves as Executive Director of Health Services at Prairie View A&M University, a member of the Texas A&M University System. In this role, her responsibilities include the university's Health Center, Counseling Center, as well as accessibility services. She's also a lecturer for the Division of Public Health and Health. And her education includes a law degree from Samford University and a Doctor of Administration in Health Services from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Moore.
I was muted. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
And I just have to say this, as an HBC graduate, you must always tell people that I'm a proud graduate of Alabama State University.
Understood. Understood. You understood the assignment. So as you all listen to the webinar today, please provide comments and ask questions in the chat. And if we have time remaining, we'll ask some of your questions. So let's get started. So what inspired you to work in student affairs, Dr. Moore?
So it's very interesting. My career in the academy for the majority has been on the other side of the house. So I've been everything from assistant professor all the way up to department chair in healthcare administration. What was interesting to me was that all but one of my faculty appointments, I had an administrative component to what I had to do. I thought it was going to be easier if I got out of the classroom and did not have to grade papers and grade assignments, and I just went over and did that administrative part. I was wrong. The thing about it was an easy transition because I had been teaching people for years how to run healthcare organizations, and the level of administrative roles, the level of administration that I had at various institutions gave me a lot of insight to the back end of the house. So there were a lot of things that I understood. And so it made it an easy transition to come over to student affairs, to explore my desire to come to the administrative side of the house. But I will say, though, one of the things that was the most striking to me in making that transition, and I've commented to my colleagues many times about it, was that to be a faculty member, I didn't have to understand what student affairs did to do my job well. But to be in student affairs, you also don't have to understand exactly what the faculty member does to do your job well. But when you both understand how you can work together, the results that we produce for students are so much greater.
I couldn't agree more. Having worked on both sides of the house, as you say, unfortunately, we don't often know enough about what each side does, and because of that, there are gaps sometimes in how we support students. So because we sometimes make assumptions, but thank you for that. So in terms of your leadership style, how would you describe what your leadership style is, and how has that guided you in the profession?
So I don't like to talk about my leadership style based upon any specific theory, but if I had to say anyone, it would be I'm a servant leader at heart. Um, I would say servant leader and transformational leader. But one of the things that I think is probably the most common response that I get is that my leadership is centered in excellence. And so my teams have always been high performing teams because I've modeled for them what I would like to see in return. And we always make sure that the student is at the center of what we're doing. And so my leadership is really about making sure we're serving the students. We understand that those students that come to us in health services, they already have some type of problem and we don't need to make it worse. And so our job is to always do our best to ameliorate the situation for any student that comes to us. I am a very because my expectations high, I understand that the clearer my team understands what's expected, the better they are able to actually rise to the expectation. And so I believe in being very clear in communicating expectations and goals. I believe in having shared governance to an extent, because there's always going to be that veto power that you may have to have, that I may have to have as a leader. But one of the things that I think some years ago, one of my direct reports said to me, and it stood out to me over the years. She said to me, you say no a lot, but it's okay because you always tell me why. And I think that's because of the level of transparency that I tried to have and the way in which I like to communicate, being transparent in this. And I like the way my new president, Dr. LeGrand, says this, and be as honest as I can be in the situation, because there's some things that you cannot divulge, but you do have to make sure that people have the information that they need to process your decision or to process what's expected of them to move forward.
Yes, I agree with you. There are times as a leader where you have to sort of embargo information. Sometimes it can't be shared at a certain time, and it is what it is. But I think to your transition from being a faculty member to being maybe department chair, um, going from being a person that maybe works directly with students to being then the manager of people who work with students. Um, what was that transition like, and what were some lessons you learned?
So I think that may be one of the differences here at Prairie View. I can't get away from the students. I still work very directly with the
Right.
students. I've had students who've told me, you're going to miss me when I'm gone. And I always say, well, let me practice it now. Let me see. Let me practice. But they don't let me practice it. But one of the things, though, that I think in that transition that was easy for me is that I've had colleagues tell me, you're a teacher as a leader. And so one of the things I do well is to identify within my team their strengths, but also those areas where they need improvement. And so we work to develop those areas where they need improvement so that it can amplify their strengths. And in looking at my team when I joined, my team was a strong team, but no one had worked on AMP to develop those areas that needed improvement. And once we were able to do that, they were able to understand and connect the dots between the services that they were providing and truly the way in which it impacted the students and it impacted their ability to transition throughout their years here, but successfully into their career. So I think that was the thing that probably was the thing that stood out the most, was making sure people understood their why. Because what I've noticed oftentimes, especially in health services, you have people that they know how to be a doctor all day, they know how to be a nurse all day, and they come in to be that doctor and be that nurse, but they're a doctor and a nurse on a college campus. So that means something different. And that's what was the thing that I was able to pull, because on the academic side, I was always trained to look at what did the evidence say, or were we using evidence-based practices, and how did that guide what we did here? And here I had to give those opportunities to expand beyond just those clinical evidence-based practices, but those that were in the development of the students as well.
That makes sense. And it sounds to me like you are a natural mentor as well. Like, you don't just do the job and the nuts and the bolts, but you're a mentor for your staff, but you're in a sense a model. You talked about excellence and modeling what excellence looks like. I think about students. We have a lot of students that we serve in universities are first generation, and so they may not necessarily have great examples of what excellence looks like at your level. Um, and I think sometimes as student affairs professionals, we get into, like, I do admissions, or I do advising, or I do student programming, but don't necessarily see themselves as a model for other people. How do you sort of embrace that mindset?
I think that comes from development. That comes from the staff development perspective. I think that individuals cannot see their impact on others until they see truly what they have to offer. And so sometimes it really takes those opportunities of saying, hey, you do this really well, but this is an impediment to you. And I'll give an example. She just retired, but one of my best staff members ever was my business manager. And she had been with the university 43 years when she retired. And she was one of those individuals that if I needed her to do something, as soon as I asked her to do it, I didn't need to follow up, because she would get irritated if I asked her to follow up. I got it. You got it. I'm leaving it alone. My bad. When I first started with her, I realized that she would get frustrated if she could not accomplish something on her list, because that list to her was the way to guide everything that she did. But it actually became a barrier, because for her, she had to finish it in the order of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I had to give her this wonderful idea. So since you're having a problem at 3, can we just skip it and go to 4 and come back to it? And what I had to explain to her was that your list is a tool that you've used to help you, but it is also holding you hostage. And she had to change in her mind how she viewed that list. But once she did it, she was able to move on. And I think, and it's funny because, and I said how long she had been at the institution. One of the things that she said to me about 2 years into my tenure here was, I don't know where I would be in my career if you had come earlier, because I've learned so many things from you. And what I realized is that teacher part of me that never goes away, it's always working on developing people. And I think that's what helps people see their ability to impact others, because you have to build up your mid-level leaders. You have to build them up, one, to empower them, but you also have to give them the knowledge and the skills that they need to be successful, because if you're building them up and you want to send them into these spaces, they need to be equipped to go into those spaces. So they need to know the language. They need to know the concepts. They need to know the theory. So I think it's really all about development and building each individuals up, and also understanding that your goal is to prepare that next set of leaders. And it's not your goal just to sit in that position and hold it for forever, but to prepare those that are coming after you.
And speaking of those who are coming after you, if you think about new leaders on your team, obviously you're leading leaders. If you've got new leaders, what advice do you give new leaders, maybe in their first 90 days to be successful in, working with you?
I think new leaders first, they have to come in and be open to learn. They also have to, I found this very important at institutions within the state of Texas. They have to go into a new environment and have some reverence for the history of the institution or the department. And the reason why I say that is because you can quickly turn off those individuals who've been career professionals within that area when you start to talk about the things that you see that need improvement, but you only speak about it as if it's horrible or if it's negative or you can't believe they're doing it that way. Because they may be doing it the slowest way in the world, but it's been effective for so many years. They just need that opportunity to learn that, oh, I can just click a button and it does it. But you have to have some reverence for this is how they've done it. They took pride in what they did. So you have to make sure that you talk about and you talk about your ideas in a way that are not going to turn off individuals from actually accepting those ideas. I think for new leaders also, new leaders come in with a whole lot of ideas. A whole lot of ideas. My suggestion for any new leader that wants to bring in ideas, before you bring the idea, do the work. That means you go and see what it would actually take to stand up that idea. What processes exist or don't exist that need to be created? What money exists or doesn't exist that needs to be raised? What do you need to actually stand up that idea? Because if you do that work, one, you show the individual you're presenting it to that, hey, I'm serious about this and I see how we can make it happen. And you decrease the likelihood of hearing the no. Mm-hmm. Because that no does something to new leaders. New leaders that come in with a lot of ideas, that those no's oftentimes discourage them. And the leader is not trying to discourage you. They just need you to do the work, because sometimes you can have the greatest idea in the world, but it's just not feasible for your area at that time. So you have to do that work before you present that idea. Have reverence for the history of the institution and the department. And then the last thing I would say is come in with the mindset that you are there to do the job that is asked of you. That may not be the job that is on your job description, because what's your job description may not be exactly what is needed of you at that moment. And if they're asking you to do it, they may truly need you to do it, and you can show and build yourselves in ways that you may not have ever imagined. So those are my top 3 things.
That makes a lot of sense. There's usually there on job descriptions or on contracts, there's a last line that says other duties as necessary. And I think sometimes we forget that. But there are times when we need to remember that. In terms of, your experiences, I mean, you've talked about, some of the places that you've attended, some of the places where you've worked. I'm sure you've been around some good leaders. Maybe when you think about the leaders that you've worked with, who was a good leader, and what did they teach you?
And let me be clear, good and bad leaders have taught me.
Correct. Yeah, correct.
I've learned some of my best lessons from the bad leaders.
Well, let's protect the names of the guilty, but
I'll never say. But I will start with the bad leaders because one of the things that was most striking to me about someone that led me was that they did not make me feel that good when they did certain things. And when I thought about how I described those feelings, I said, wait, I think I've heard that before. I think somebody has said I made them feel like that. And then I said, wait a minute. Then whatever I was doing that person is doing, let me stop right now, because I don't want people to feel that way after interacting with me. So that bad leader became a mirror, and it allowed me to see things that I could improve in myself. And but I had to be open to see that I was able to learn something even from a horrible interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my best leaders have been those leaders. I'm gonna describe it in a sport that I know very little about other than what's on TV. And that is the people that go out and ride and race the horses. My best leaders have been those that have opened up that gate and just let me run. They have let me run. And that's because those leaders recognize that I has had excellence as my meter. They realized that I had the potential to do whatever they asked. And after they let me do whatever they asked, they saw I gave them more than what they asked for. And so they leaned into trusting that and allowing me to ideate. You can sometimes have leaders that seem to crush your ability and your spirit to give and give new ideas. And so I think that those great leaders really understand that you have to let people have their own ideas. I tell my team all the time, I don't care how you get from A to Z. I could care less how you get from there. But what I do care about is if you have a problem, you need to tell me at C and not at T. Because if you wait until T, you have taken away my opportunity to assist you and help you get to Z. And I like that I operate in that way because I will have what I think is the best idea in the world. And once my team member comes in there and they do it, I'm like, oh, that's even better than what I thought. That's the person that allows people to show who they are and bring their best to the table. And those are the best leaders that allow people to bring their best to the table. You're never going to be a great leader to others until you realize that when they shine, you shine. So let them shine. Let them shine. When they do great work, give them credit for great work. You still get credit as the leader because you're leading them, but you make sure they get the credit because then they're motivated to do more. And it's funny because I recently told somebody my greatest legacy has been those leaders that I've developed because they've gone on to do bigger, better things. And sometimes they get a little ahead of themselves, and that's okay because you also have to let people learn. It's kind of like with when you think about people talking about toddlers and touching hot things, you could tell them don't touch it all you want, but until they touch it, then they realize, oh, I don't want to touch that again. And so you can be developing leaders and saying, I don't think you want to do that. I don't think you want to do that. And they're adamant to do it. And once they do it, oh, I wish I hadn't done it. Well, I tried to tell you. But sometimes you have to let people experience even a failure so that they can grow from it and have that personal experience with it. So I think the leaders are the ones that are always having the lessons. They're being transparent. They are inspiring others to bring their best to the table, and they're allowing them to bring their best, and they're recognizing the greatness in others and letting them shine.
Okay, well, those of you who are watching, I hope you're taking notes. I think "let them shine" is probably a good thing to write down. If you didn't catch that, you definitely need to remember that one. Let's see. In terms of working with staff, in student affairs, most of the time people make what they make, and we don't have the ability. It's not like a business where you can say, well, if you hit these goals, here's a bonus. Um, how do you motivate your team when you don't necessarily have that as a tool?
So one of the things that I have found to be successful is that I may not be able to give you money, but they're university awards. And so if I'm able, I can nominate you for an award because you can get that recognition and the money that way. I also do regular team retreats, and our retreats always are fun and then work. Um, I do parties. I do a lot of celebration parties. We celebrate birthdays, but we celebrate holidays.
Hmm.
And we do those often in a potluck style. And I usually cook more than anybody. There's no usually. I always cook more than anybody else. But that's partially because I show love through cooking for others. And so they've come to expect that they're going to be celebrated. They've also realized that if they ask me to do something, I try to do it. And if I can't achieve it, I'll let them know. I've had individuals who were they were really adamant that they felt like they deserved a raise. I did whatever I could do within my authority, but sometimes it was out of my hands. But even at that moment, I always share, you always have to do what's best for you. And so if what's best for you is going somewhere else because you can get more, I'm not going to stand in your way. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's probably been the one most disappointing thing, is that individuals felt like I would be upset if they left. And I'm not upset, because you have to go and grow. And if you need to, go and do that. And so I'm always the last. Well, they always think I'm the last one to know. I'm never the last one to know. I always find out. But I don't say anything until they're ready to tell me, because I need for them to feel comfortable about it. But I think that in student affairs, we have to understand that, one, higher education is not what it used to be. We are facing some times where we have to really think about the way in which we deliver a service. And people don't like to think about it, but the way in which we run this business of
Mm-hmm.
education. And I think for student affairs professionals to be successful, one, they have to find their motivation, not in their pocket, but in their passion for the work.
Mm-hmm.
Because you are very rarely going to be compensated at the level you believe you should be compensated. And so recognizing people for the great work that they do. When there are awards and rewards that you can give that to them. Having regular staff retreats so people can just have that refresher and that a moment to connect outside of the job. Um, what else do I do? I give great gifts too. They always get great gifts. You know, there's some coveted gifts. I had to hold back though, because I started spending a little too much money on those. But just celebrating others. I think that's the biggest thing we need to know, that we have to celebrate our teams. Our teams work hard. They sometimes feel underappreciated. And so, and I had to, someone just told me a couple weeks ago, but you don't tell us. I was like, I show you. And I had to tell, my love language is not words of affirmation. It's it's actually doing the task. I said, because people can tell you all day, oh, I like you, I love you, but then they don't show you like a love. I show you. Well, we need to hear it still. Okay, well, I'm just gonna say that word. But all of the stuff that I did for you, well, you know, you did all of that, and I was like, oh my gosh. I think the thing too is leading student affairs teams are hard, because a lot of times the students bring hard stuff to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so we sometimes take that hard stuff home with us.
Mm-hmm.
Leave what you can at the job, take what you need, and be this. Oh, this is something I meant to say earlier. We are having a crisis in the workforce right now because there is a different desire for work-life balance than once was.
Mm-hmm.
We know with the mental health crisis that individuals do need more of a reprieve than they've previously had. But we also have to understand the level of flexibility that some desire is really not possible in student affairs, because we have to be here when the students need us. And so
Mm-hmm.
we have to think about finding other ways to find that balance for us.
You bring up a good point, because when there's orientation, it is what it is, and it's a long, long days, long hours, and there just sometimes are those periods of the year where it's just like that. um and like you said, you can't just say, well, I'm gonna not be here when students really need us. You kind of have to be there. But part of also, I think, in terms of growing, is figuring out, or how you tell the story of what you do, and how it relates to the bigger picture of student success. So when you think about health services and the work that you all do in your department, how does that, in your vision, relate to the big picture of student success?
If the student isn't healthy, they can't be in class. That's the biggest connection there. I think one of the things we have to remember is COVID showed everybody that our departments were more important than they ever realized.
Mm-hmm.
And um, prior to COVID, health services was probably, oh, they're just over there in that clinic. But after COVID, people realized how important it was to have individuals that understood how to keep not only the students healthy, but them healthy as well. Because if they weren't healthy, they weren't earning checks. And so I think that not only helping people to understand if they're not healthy, they cannot be in class. But we also, that's one of the things that I brought with me from the academic side is we do a lot of assessment in health services. So we're able to show you the number of students that receive our services and how they matriculate successfully. We're able to show you things that demonstrate how we directly impact or contribute to the success of students. And so that's where student affairs is going now. You have to show the evidence of your work, and that's simply with some simple assessment tools that we have to use to make sure we're documenting the work that we've done. Coming to health services at this institution was interesting because they had a very benevolent philosophy when it came to delivering services. But that was not always in the best health of the department. And as a health administrator, I always had to teach my students that you're responsible for the health of the patients as well as the organization.
Mhm.
And so you have to find that balance between the two. And so I think that
Yes.
with student affairs, we have to understand that, yeah, we're really concerned with students getting things specifically from our department, but the ultimate goal is for that student to graduate. So how am I contributing
Right.
to that student graduating and being successful in their career? That's that balance for student affairs.
Yes, I think back to one of my master's health admin classes, and the professor was like, even if it's a nonprofit health organization, if it doesn't make a profit, it won't exist to treat any more patients. So we have to make sure that the system is working. But one of the things I also gathered from what you said is part of storytelling is the qualitative piece. I think sometimes in student affairs or higher ed, we like to tell the qualitative story, but sometimes we also got to tell that quantitative story and have data, numbers, facts to go with
Mhm.
what we're doing and why it meets strategic objectives, for the institution. And so, again, if you're taking notes, I think that was a really important thing that Dr. Moore shared with us right there. Um, yeah, I think as leaders, leaders typically are always in a sense of like adding to their toolbox. Um, are there any maybe books, podcasts, resources that, as you grow, that you draw from that you think would be beneficial for our members?
So I am the worst person to ask about that.
Okay, fair enough.
I read, I love to read, but I like to read for my pure entertainment. I read a lot of journal articles, but I am horrible on remembering who said it and where it came from. I can remember it enough to go do a quick Google search and tell you, okay, this is where I got it from. And I'm horrible with that only because my brain can only retain so much information.
Mhm.
And I am always just in awe of those people that are rattling off all of these books and these. I was like, how do they remember all of that? Because I can't. There's only one book throughout my career that I always share with my students and even with colleagues, and that's a book called The Power of a Positive No. The Power of a Positive No helped me and has helped many students over the years find the ability to set boundaries in a way that did not seem as a personal affront to those individuals with whom they needed to set that boundary. And so that's probably the only book, because all of my other books, I just read for pleasure. I like to read for pleasure.
But that's an important point because work is part of work-life balance, I think. So if you know that your job, you have all the things you got to deal with, reading things that help you to unwind from that. I think we got to, like you said, we got to figure out what do people need. Maybe we can't pay them more. Maybe the hours are what they are. But if reading a chapter of a book that has nothing to do with, your work world, if that's what it is, that's okay. So I think that's important.
I'll tell you how I take lunch because I rarely find myself working. I rarely find myself not working through lunch if I don't leave my office.
Hmm.
So what I do to try to make myself not work at lunch is I watch something on Hulu. I I only will do a 30-minute show because that's about all I'm gonna. Lunch is an hour, but it's only about 30 minutes. And right now I am watching something called Spellbound on Hulu. It's about
Hmm.
teenage witches. It's just, it's never anything that's going to get me dug down deep into a storyline, but it's just going to be something enough to distract me so that I'm not tempted to go in and answer that email or finish working on that assignment, but that I can just take a moment to chew my food. And I think
Hmm.
we as leaders need to take those moments because they're hard to take sometimes, especially if you're one of those individuals like myself who does not want to take the work home.
Well, I agree with you. I think that's an important point about work-life balance. I'm just going to ask you as we close, if there's one thing we haven't talked really about is your role as VP of administration. It is, maybe not necessarily the role that everybody knows, but there's a lot of responsibilities that come with that role. But in terms of, getting the membership to know the board, could you talk a little bit about some of the things that you all are, you're working on in that role?
So I think the biggest thing that I have is just being in charge of our policy manuals and our strategic plan right now.
Hmm.
Just some of the back end infrastructure to help facilitate the way in which the board operate and the organization operates. That's to me the biggest thing that the VP of administration does. I think that the role varies in throughout different, it has varied over time and transition, but it also has the director of technology under it. But I think that the majority of what I do is really centered on just those policies and procedures on the back end, and now working through the strategic planning for the organization's next 5 years. We are in our centennial year, but what's the next 5 years going to be of that
Hmm.
next century? So I think that's the biggest thing that I would say from VP of administration.
Well, now that we all know a lot more about you and your leadership style, we understand why you are really custom fit for that role. Like that is you get to use a lot of your gifts in that role. So we think I'm glad that you're serving to KUSPA and allowing us to get to know you better. So
Thank you.
um, with this, I think I want to make sure that we're honoring people's time, but that's all the time that we've got today. But thank you all. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Moore. Thank you all who have joined us in this webinar. Again, we'd like to thank you, Dr. Moore, for today's presentation. Um, I believe either if it's not in the chat already or we'll be sending it out, I think there's a feedback survey. There it goes. There's a link there because as Dr. Moore said, assessment is important. So we are trying to practice what we preach as leaders,
Can I
right?
get a thumbs up or thumbs down? Because I don't know how I did. Everybody was so quiet. You can give me thumbs down too.
Can we get
I take
can we
all
get some
feedback.
reactions, please? Can we get some reactions in the Zoom?
I just want to know. I didn't, you were so quiet. Thank you.
Yes, we appreciate you. So we want to let you all know that our next webinar Wednesday is going to be on Wednesday, April 2nd, 2025 at noon. Please invite a colleague to participate next month. And remember, TCUSPA membership year, kind of runs from January to December. And so just also want to remind you, if you're not already a member, to please join. And if you are a member, please work with your organization to make sure that those get renewed because that's important. But thank you all so much for joining us today and enjoy the rest of your week. And we thank you all for being affiliated members with TCUSPA.